Do you trust in God? Do you trust in Him? Now, before you say, oh, yes, I do, I want you to understand what that means. Because when you say you trust in God, you are saying, I have faith that God's Word will come to pass. And because I have faith that God's Word will come to pass, I will follow Him wherever He leads. Do you trust in God? Or do we only trust in God so long as things are going our way? Do we only trust in God so long as there's sunshine and there are no clouds in the sky? But whoa, as soon as I feel a raindrop, that trust is gone. Because it's so quick, it's so easy for us to say, oh yes, I trust in Him. But the moment there's friction in this world, it is so easy for us to turn our backs on Him who has given us the victory. See, because victory is built on that trust. And in fact, trust in God is essential to victory in Jesus. We have to believe it. More than just say it, we have to show it. We have to live it. That even when it seems like our world is falling apart, when everything is crashing all around us, we continue to walk by faith and not by sight. We continue trusting in the spiritual realm, in the spiritual kingdom, in the spiritual victory we have in Jesus Christ. Now, this year, our focus, our theme is living in victory. So that means we already have victory, and now we are enjoying the celebration of living in it. And in this, we are talking about Joshua. And here we have come to a very, very well-known story, a very well-known event in Joshua's life, the Battle of Jericho. But before we get to that point, I want you to notice Joshua chapter 1, and what God told Joshua, I believe applies to us as Christians today. God told Joshua, have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Wherever you go, God is with you. Now, do we believe that? Do we trust in God that, yes, wherever we go, as long as we're walking in the light, as long as we're walking in His truth, that He is with us? Let's look at this victory that Joshua found because of his faith, and here's another one, obedience. You know, I can say I trust God, but if I do not follow through with that statement by obedience, then I don't really trust in God. I can say that, oh yes, I have faith in Jesus. But if I'm not following Him, if I'm not obeying His word, then how far does that faith really extend? Well, let's look together. Let's look beginning in Joshua chapter 5. Let's back up just about 3 verses to Joshua chapter 5, verse 13. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? And he said, no, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, what does my Lord say to the servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went in and none came out. And the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand, with its king and mighty men of valor. I want us to notice this gift that God has given Joshua and his nation, the nation of Israel, the nation which belonged to the Lord. So we see, if you can imagine the eve before the battle, here is Joshua. He has brought the people of God to the outskirts of Jericho. And I just imagine Joshua looking and seeing this mighty fortress with its walls that are so intimidating. And they are prepared for a siege. They're prepared for a fight. Perhaps even sees armed guards, or he sees all those gates that are normally open. They're all closed. And in the distance he sees a person, a soldier. Now, if you're Joshua and you're looking at this fortress, your enemy, and it is shut up, and then you see that there is a soldier between you and the city perhaps, you might think to yourself, here's an envoy from the enemy. Here's someone from the enemy, and they've come to talk terms, or they've come to talk about the battle that is to come. So it makes sense when Joshua sees this man, this soldier, and he has a sword drawn. Joshua has this question: are you for us, or are you for them? Are you for us, or for our enemies? And I love the soldier's response. He said, no, I'm not for either. I'm not for you. I'm not for your enemy. I am for God. See, it is not about God just being on my side and God waging my wars and God doing the things that I desire. It is that I am called to be on God's side, to serve in the Lord's army. And that is a point that this officer was trying to get across. And I imagine that Joshua's realization that this officer was from God, the spokesperson of God, he felt humility as well as encouragement. We know he expressed humility because he fell down on his face and he said these words, and these are words that we should all say. What does the Lord require of his servant? What does God want from me? It reminds me of Saul. Do you remember Saul asked the same question? First he said, who are you, Lord? Because he wanted to know who had approached him on the road to Damascus. But then he asked a very similar question. And it's a question that we see Joshua asking. What does the Lord say to his servant? What does he want? And in this, the tone shifts. Joshua is no longer the leader. He is the follower. Joshua is no longer the commander. He is but a soldier. And as we continue reading, in this moment, we see Joshua having a reminder that God is in control and Joshua is to take orders from God. But I also believe that Joshua felt a sense of encouragement because he remembered that God was in control, that he remembered that God was in charge. You may not know this, but there's a sense of loneliness in leadership. That every decision you make will not only affect you, but affect those who are around you. And very few of them will understand why you made the decisions that you had to make. President Harry Truman said this: to be president is to be lonely, very lonely at times of great decisions. Now here God had promised Joshua all the way back in chapter 1, I will never leave you and I will never forsake you. And Joshua sees that realized with this officer. Now here's one blessing that we can take away from Joshua chapter 5. No matter what position you serve in the Lord's church, you're taking orders from someone on high. See, whatever it is we do in this earth as children of God, we do not engineer by our own devices. See, if we do this correctly, if we are following God correctly, everything we do and everything that we say originates from God. That is how we're all called to serve, by following His will and not our will. This commander reminded Joshua to be holy because he was in the presence of holiness. So here's Joshua, and he has his face down and his sandals are off, and he has expressed that he is being submissive to God's will, God's plan. And here's the first thing that God says. And I imagine this soldier begins to motion to Jericho, and you imagine almost the camera moving from Joshua in this scene to Jericho, and you see this mighty fortress, and it is shut up inside. No one is going out, and no one is going back in. And here God tells Joshua, I have given this city with its king and its mighty men of valor, its soldiers, its elite, I have given into your hands. What a gift. You know, because God, at a word, could have had that city vaporized if He wanted. God could have called fire and brimstone down against this city. God could have called 12 legions of angels to destroy this city and wipe it off the face of the earth. And here, so we're seeing when God tells Joshua, I have given this city to you and to my people, we begin to realize that the battle of Jericho is not a battle with the Canaanites, but a battle with the Israelites in their hearts. It's not about walls and fortresses and gates and spears and swords and shields, but it's about the barricades of doubt within the Israelites' hearts. See, God is making it clear to his people that victory has already been given to them. See, 40 years ago, there were these spies that went into this wilderness and they saw cities like Jericho, and they came back, and 10 out of the 12 spies said to the Israelites, "We cannot do this. We're like grasshoppers. We're like little bugs compared to these fortified cities and these great heroes of their land. And they're so strong. They're so mighty. There's nothing that we can do." It was because of this doubt that they wandered for 40 years. And now here they are, at the cusp of victory, at everything that had been realized and that had been planned, but had been thwarted by the doubt of God's own people. When will people begin learning to trust in God and take him at his word? You know, Jericho was the first step. It was at this point that was a strategic point for the rest of the land, which was about to be conquered, but it was fortified, it was shut up. So what could they do? How could they as a people overcome? See, God gave them this gift. And what we need to take away from verse 2 is that we fight from a position of victory. We are not fighting for the hope of victory. Let me say that again. We as Christians, just like the Israelites, we are fighting from a position of victory. We already have it. It has already been given to us by God. We're not waging spiritual warfare in the hopes. We're wishing, we're thinking, we're contemplating that maybe if we're wise enough, smart enough, strong enough, that we will somehow have victory. That's not the way Christianity was designed. That's not the way God's people were designed. That is not what God has planned for his people. God has said, "I've already given you the victory." Jesus said, "I have overcome the world. Be of good cheer." See, Jesus in his earthly ministry, he overcame Satan in the wilderness of temptation. He cast out the ruler when he died on the cross. And when he rose from the grave, he made a promise and assurance to all of us that we have victory in his name. When will we begin to believe it? When will we begin to trust God and trust his word? Everything we do, from growing in our faith to following his will, we understand that if God is for us, who can be against us? We're going to come back to that verse in just a minute. But we know that God, he strengthens us. He intercedes for us. He forgives us. He is for us. So the problem is not with God and his power. The problem is with his people and their doubt. Do we trust in him? Let me ask you this question. We'll continue on. When this community, this Upland community, sees this church, do they see courageous soldiers of the cross? Are we even distinguishable from the rest of the world? Are we so quick to imitate the world's methods, to cater to the world's appetite, to solicit the world's approval, and to measure what we do according to the world's standards? Because if that's how we are, we don't have the victory. But when we follow God, we follow his standard, when we believe what Jesus said, when we trust in what he has done, then we are more than conquerors to him who has loved us and given us everything. See, this victory, it didn't belong to the Israelites. It belonged to God. But God beckoned them to come and share in this victory. It was an incredible gift. Let's keep reading about trust and obedience. Now we see the march, beginning in verse 3. You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. This you shall do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall flat. And the people shall go down, everyone straight before him. So Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, Take up the ark of the covenant, and let the 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of God. And he said to the people, Go forward, march around the city, and let the armed men pass on before the ark of the Lord. Look at verse 11. So he caused the ark of the Lord to circle the city, going about it once, and they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp. Verse 14. And the second day they marched around the city once and returned into the camp. So they did this for 6 days. On the seventh day they rose early in the dawn of the day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. So let's think about what has just happened here. God has already told Joshua, you have the victory. So does that mean Joshua and the Israelites are just going to kind of sit back and let God do his work? Absolutely not. See, God called for his people to be engaged. This gift was from God. The strategy was God, but he called his people to work. They were called to work. There's no problem too great that God cannot solve, but he calls all of us to lean on his wisdom and strength to get off the pews and go into the vineyard. That is what God has called for each and every one of us. As God began to give instruction to Joshua, I imagine it would have been easy for Joshua to kind of a dumbfounded look on his face. Well, hold on, God, you're not giving me tanks? God, you're not giving me horses. You're not giving me chariots. You're not going to call frogs or hail to come down from the heavens. You're not going to have a pillar of a cloud or a pillar of fire. You're just going to have us walk around the city. God said, do this. So Joshua did it. That's as easy as it was. That's all that Joshua had to do. What was the purpose of walking around the walls? It was a test of faith to show that the true battle belongs to the Lord. And so here's Joshua, and you imagine being this leader, and you have to relay to all these people, a couple of million, the plan of God and how you're going to defeat the enemy. I imagine that would have been difficult. And from what it sounds like, Joshua just gave the order every day, walk around the city once. It doesn't seem like he gave the full expression of the order all at once at the beginning before the 7 days commence. So you begin to march. And some say that only a select few marched around Jericho. From what I'm reading in the text, Joshua's commanding the people to do this, to do that. So it sounds like every person had a part or responsibility in this battle. So Jericho looms over you. The citizens at first are in fear of you, but maybe by day 3, they begin to laugh. Maybe by day 4, they begin to mock. Maybe by day 5, you have vegetation and fruit being chucked at you from top of those walls. And still you walk. Still you march. It was only about 9 acres. It wasn't really that long of a walk. Maybe it could be done in about 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how many people walked, how fast they walked. So you go and you walk for about an hour and you come back home. You come back to your tents. You come back to your camp. What do you talk about? I wonder what we're going to do tomorrow. I guess we're probably going to walk again. It must have been frustrating. It must have been tempting to say, hold on, God. Hold on, I think I have a better idea. Hold on, God, let me tell you what I think. But no, they marched each and every day. You walked, you waited, you prayed, you walked again. Day 5, day 6, those walls, they still look strong. I'm not seeing a rock crumble. I'm not seeing a corner falling apart. Even on the 7th walk, the 7th time, on the 7th day, those walls look just as strong as ever. Where's your faith? Where's your trust in that moment? When you feel red faced, you feel humiliated, you feel embarrassed. And see here, God is teaching his people a lesson of patience. God's ways are above our ways, and God is never one to rush his plans. See, we're called to wait on God. It's not our place to question. It is our place to follow wherever he leads. We've just read Romans chapter 8, verses 31, 32. What shall we say to all these things? All the suffering, all the problems, all the persecution. What shall we say? If God is for us, who can be against us? For if he was willing to give his own son, not sparing him, but he's willing to give his son for us, why do we think he's going to hold back on all these blessings? See, if we trust in God, if we are willing to trust in his word every day, we obey his will and we follow him, every wall will seem so small in the day of triumph. But we have to keep walking. We have to keep praying. We have to keep waiting on the Lord because he'll deliver us the victory. Let's close this morning with the close of this story. Beginning in verse 16. And at the seventh time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the destruction for the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But you, keep yourselves from the things devoted to your destruction, lest when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make a camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble on it. But for all the silver and gold, every vessel of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord." So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted with a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. So the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. So you walk. 7 times you're walking around this city. And at the 7th time, when you get to the point that you were at the beginning, Joshua turns around and says, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." And trumpets begin to blare. And then you hear echoes from the people. And this shout was not a shout of terror. It was not a shout of disappointment. It was not a shout of sadness. It was a shout of celebration. And when the people began to shout, when the trumpets began to blow, the wall fell down flat. It wasn't by the echoes of the noise. It wasn't by the walking that caused some problems with the stabilization of the walls. It was the power of God that brought down those walls. It was the point when God demonstrated, as He has done time again, that He was with His people. So they prospered. You know, Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5, "For though we walk in the flesh, we're not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ." See, our war that we're waging is not of the physical, it's not against flesh and blood, but it's of far more importance. It is over the thoughts and the souls of all those who are around us. And we dare not let our faith wane because of the scoffs and jeers from those who reject Christ. No matter how foolish our actions might seem to the world, we continue walking forward. We continue celebrating the victory God has given us, because as long as it's from God, we will certainly prosper. We read from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 30, "By faith, not by strength, not by intelligence, not by wisdom, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they'd been encircled 7 days." I want to close with this thought. The lesson will be yours. You know, we learn a couple of lessons from Joshua 6. With Jericho, we witness the power of faith, as we just read. But we also, with Jericho, we witness the insecurity offered by the world. I think about those who were in Jericho when they heard about the power of God. Instead of coming to His people in humility, they shut up walls. They hid themselves behind worldly fortresses, worldly strongholds, thinking that they could survive, but they were brought low. It is so easy for us to build our castles, our monuments, our fortresses in this world. But no matter how much we prepare, we're building a foundation on sinking sand. We have to continue trusting in God, because if we're trusting in this world, we're going to face disappointment. So many focus on the material, on the worldly, believing if they require enough, they will then be happy. If they're healthy enough, then they will be secure. If they have a legacy, then their memory will be immortal. Nevertheless, all walls fall. But those who trust in God will have their strength renewed. Those who trust in God will find the victory. So are we marching this morning, or are we holed up behind a wall of defenses? Are we listening to God? Are we investing in the heavenly places or in the here and the now? Let me ask you one more question. Who is going to be the victor in the end? Those who trust in the world or those who place their faith in Jesus Christ? Each and every one of us are called to trust and obey. That's all there is to it, to be a child of God. You trust in God. Your faith extends to wherever God leads you. And by following that faith, you obey His will. And by doing so, every wall will fall. Do you become a child of God this morning? Do you mean be baptized into Christ? Why not make that step of faith and trust that He has the power to save? If you're a child of God and you've been struggling with doubt, you've been struggling with fear, you've been struggling with the material, why not come to God now? Let us pray for you, because we know that prayers of the righteous are most effective. We know that God has the power and He has the will to forgive you. If you have any burden at all, if you have any need at all, come now while we stand and while we sing.